We had an earlier session related to TABE Class C online that was recorded, and you can review that as well after the conference materials are done. But I'll go ahead and advance the slides, so you should all see the slides changing. Talking about a remote testing, and there are 3 different options for TABE 11 and 12. The first 2 options are related to each individual program doing their own proctoring, and option 3 is having a vendor do the proctoring. So we'll kind of break it out that way about using your own staff for proctoring or using a vendor for the proctoring. Option 1 is the ability to do just the locator test in an unproctored environment or not proctored. So there is the ability, and we have some guidance materials available on our website if you'd like to assign the locator test only to students. That has some options to do that in an unproctored environment. But we're going to spend most of the session to talk about option 2, and that's remote proctoring the full TABE 11 and 12, or as I mentioned, TABE Class C test through web conferencing platforms. First, just an information related to remote proctoring. We publish all of our guidance documents and manuals right onto our public website of tabetest.com. So we'll go out there in a little bit and look at those documents, but they are available on tabetest.com under our resources tab. The guidance documents are divided into examiner and student instructions. So there are manuals for both the examiner side and the student side. Some programs have sent the student manuals directly to the students as PDF. Others have chosen to go through those manuals into group sessions as well on webinars. Inside the examiner manual, we have tips related to proctoring and remote proctoring and managing your web meetings. So there's a lot of different information. The information in the manuals tries to be as agnostic as possible because there are many different web conferencing systems, whether it's Zoom or WebMeeting or GoToMeeting and WebEx. So a lot of different options, and sometimes the different functionalities are called different things in the different platforms, but we try to cover that as best we can in a general sense. So you'll notice at the very bottom of the screen that talks about in a private room. I know Zoom calls it a breakout room, WebEx calls it a private room. So we try to use a general term in most cases about some of the functionality that you should be able to relate to whatever platform you are using. When we talk about option 2 and remote proctoring with web conferencing systems, the web conferencing system is something that you have within your organization already. It's not included in the TABE Online system. So there's not a standard system for web conferencing. The biggest point for remote proctoring is that there needs to be a lot of practice. Practice for both students and examiners. They're also want to make sure that we're following any state guidelines. I'm not 100% sure if Aspire has any specific policies that need to be related to remote proctoring outside of normal proctoring, but we want to make sure that we're following any guidance from the state level as well. But the most important part is that a lot of us are used to attending web meetings, whether it's a Zoom meeting or a WebEx meeting, but not everybody's used to leading those web meetings. So as we get ready to remote proctor, the proctor of the test is now also going to be the leader of the webinar. They're also going to be the test administrator using the TABE Online system. So they need to be well-versed in both of those systems, the TABE Online system and the web platform that they may be using locally for that. In the web conferencing system, all communication will be done through the computer audio. There won't be any people connecting with a cell phone. Cell phones are still prohibited from testing with TABE, and they will utilize the webcam so that you can inspect the student's area, their testing area, and also to monitor the student while they're testing. We do have a limit right now on 5 students at one time to be proctored in a web conferencing session. Just as an overview of the web proctoring and the differences from in-person proctoring, if you're doing in-person proctoring for TABE Online, You're typically testing in a classroom or a computer lab that has the distractions all removed. The proctor may be watching through a window, maybe watching on a camera, maybe sitting in the room as well, but you have asked the people to put their backpacks or purses or personal items in a secure location, and they're at the computer monitor to take the test. Our web application will lock down the computer while they're taking a test. And so the proctor in an in-person test is much more of a room monitor. They're just making sure students aren't getting up and walking around or leaving or talking to each other in the room. When we talk about remote proctoring, now somebody might be sitting at their kitchen table. They might be in the living room at the table. They might even be in their closet just so they get a quiet place to connect. And we need to make sure that they're free of outside distractions, but we can't avoid that. There might be the case that somebody walks in the door, or there might be a dog barking or a doorbell. So there has to be aware of that as a proctor as well. We limit this student count to 5 because as a remote proctor, you are now actively watching 5 people take a test. And so we feel that 5 is the limit to be able to watch those people during the length of the TABE test and be actively monitoring all 5 participants. Remote proctors also will need to have access to the program's TABE Online account. So we want to make sure that they are familiar with TABE Online as an administrator. And also, all remote proctoring is done through a Google Chrome browser. The Google Chrome browser is a requirement. We have had some people say that they've tried other browsers and it may work or may have partial functionality. But when we're doing remote proctoring, for the student's perspective, it is a requirement to have Google Chrome so that they have no issues while they're testing. As I mentioned, no cell phones allowed, and that they're using their webcam for that process. We encourage you to have a practice session with your staff, allowing one person to act as the proctor and other staff members to act as students in the remote proctoring session, and then to have a practice session with students involved. These practice sessions with students can be larger if needed, large group webinars. They don't have to be limited to 5, just to review what's going to be happening on the day of testing. We have seen some programs record those examples as webinars and save them for local use. So that's certainly a possibility if you wanted to record a practice session to see how it's going to be happening locally for future testing needs. If the internet has an issue during the middle of a test, just as it would with in-person testing, the TABE Online system will bookmark the progress of that student, and they will be able to log back in and continue the test. So if you have a student that has internet connectivity go down during the test, they will be able to connect back in and resume their testing. If it's quick, they can do that on the same webinar. If it's a longer outing, you would have to reschedule the webinar to do that. We also have, and I'll go back to phase 2 a little bit, but I wanted to talk about the third option of using ProctorU as a remote proctoring. The difference between option 2 and option 3 is that ProctorU now becomes the organization to do the proctoring. Since they are a third-party company, there is a fee for proctoring with ProctorU. There is an order form posted to our website, but the fees are listed on the slide. These are in addition to the TABE Online test token administration costs. These are strictly the proctoring fees, depending on what tests you're taking within that. The way that the proctoring process works is, and I'll demonstrate this a little bit later, but you will create a test session that is a proctored session that will trigger ProctorU to be involved and contact the program and the student to set up an appointment to be proctored. And then it will be one-on-one with that proctor and that student to take that assessment. We feel that the ProctorU option will be our long-term remote proctoring option. Option 2 of remote proctoring with web conferencing systems was introduced very quickly, as John mentioned, during the start of the pandemic to allow programs to continue assessing their students under the WIOA guidelines. We will keep option 2 available for the foreseeable future, certainly through the pandemic, but at some point we will discontinue option 2, only have remote proctoring through ProctorU when it becomes less needed. The best example that I talk about with option 3 in ProctorU is there are many, almost every law enforcement agency in Florida requires a TABE test to be hired prior to being allowed into those agencies. There are a lot of law enforcement professionals in northern states that like to retire to Florida and have a second career as a law enforcement professional in Florida. To do that, they would typically have to be in Florida to take that TABE test. With the ProctorU option, they would be able to take a TABE test remotely in the future. So that's the long-term need. We're certainly servicing the needs of the pandemic with option 2 and using web conferencing, but that is not a long-term option going forward. Some of the resource materials, and we'll jump out to look at the resource materials, but there are all the training videos and resource guides available both inside our TABE Online portal and also available on our public website. And I'm going to jump over to our public website right now, which is tabetest.com. And under tabetest.com, we have a couple of tools. You'll notice on the screen right now, I'm scrolling through all the announcements that we have on our main page. And there's different announcements, but the one I want to talk about, or a couple, is that all the options are reviewed under the handout that's called remote proctoring options. So if you wanted to review the remote proctoring with web conferencing or the ProctorU, that's available on this proctoring options handout. We also have, as I mentioned, all the guidance documents available. I'm going to click into here quick and open up our examiner guidance document for remote testing. And we saw the first couple of pages of this in the PowerPoint. Let me give it a second to open for everybody. And it's taking a little longer than I wanted, so quicken that up here. There we go. So in the guidance document, if I'm scrolling through it real quick, again, you'll have the requirements on the first couple of pages. Also, our support team is listed on the first inside page if you have any questions for our support team. But I want to point out that, again, as it mentioned, it's set up to be neutral for the web conferencing system as best as possible. We do encourage using the private rooms or private breakout rooms to verify identification, any identification needs that are there, so you're not sharing public or private information with a larger group. But I want to scroll down to page number 5, and I'll just draw your attention to page number 5. Step number 4 on page 5 is specific to the day of testing, that you're using this URL address to go out and to take a test. Students will still have test tickets from TABE Online. You still use TABE Online to set up a test session to then go ahead and create test tickets, but we're going to this website to test. And if I click on this website now, it will open up a browser that lets me log in. Right now I have some credentials for our tutorial, but it will let me log into the testing window. That is the access point for students. So again, it's available on page number 5 of our remote guidance documents. Another great resource, and it was just posted this week, is a device check. If you're not sure if your students' home computers are acceptable for remote testing with TABE, we now have this website. It's drcdevicecheck.com. You can click on that link or send that link out, and it will tell you to click on the run button to run a quick test. And you'll find out very quickly if all parts of your computer will support TABE testing from a remote standpoint. You'll see here that my laptop that I'm using does meet all the requirements. So instead of asking a student what their browser is and asking what their Windows version is or how much memory they have or what their CPU size is, you can use that website. And again, I'll go back to that main page, drcdevicecheck.com. You can certainly send that link out to any students, have them click on that and go through that. Another great resource is to do that in a group webinar. You can send that link out through the chat in a webinar to a group of students that are practicing for upcoming testing days and let them check their computers during that webinar. That's certainly possible. Also, under our resource tab, we have access to our online tools training. About 3/4 of the way down on the list of the resource tab is a link for our online tools training. The online tools training is another great resource to use both in our practice sessions for remote proctoring and as a leave behind or handout for students. This is the same tutorial that they will see when they go into a TABE Online test. It's just accessed through our public website. It does also require the Chrome browser, just as the remote testing does. So you can download Chrome here if you don't already have it. And at the bottom of the page, go ahead and click here to begin. And this is the testing window that students will see on the day of testing, except they do not see the login. So in the tutorial, the only link is for the online tools training. If we click into the online tools training, now we have access to the TABE 11 and 12 and also the Class E tutorials. But I'll go ahead and click into the language tutorial first. I'll just click into a level A, and we have both the standard or the text to speech, depending on if a student has an accommodation for text to speech. But the test ticket information is listed right above the login screen. So for the tutorial only, we publish the test ticket right on the screen. Traditionally, this would be delivered in the private chat directly to the student. We do not email credentials out to students. We do it through the private chat of the web conferencing system. So just so students know what they're experiencing on the day of testing, these tutorials will go through the information on what test they've been assigned to take. And then they will go through the same directions that they will have on the day of testing. They can click through the directions as a student. They can practice getting into the test, and I'm going to go through this a little quicker. But the last screen says that your computer is operating correctly, and you can go ahead and begin your test. This is the language test, sample test that I'm in. You can see that there's 6 questions. Another great use of the tutorial is that they can practice with the tools up at the top. If they want to practice with the highlighter, they can do that. If they want to practice with the sticky note, they can use a sticky note if they want to take that around and move a sticky note around, or the magnifying glass. They can also, at the bottom of the screen under options, practice changing the color. So if they want a different background, they can do that as well. There's also an option to change the contrast of the color. That changes the color and the font at the same time. So a great use of the tutorial is to find what settings a student would like before they go into the day of testing. There's a line guide for a straight edge. Oops, sorry. There's also a calculator and a formula sheet if needed on a math test. We're in a language test, so we don't see that. I'm going to page forward a couple of questions, not answering them. I'm just skipping forward. And what I wanted to show is that you can select, you can have different types of questions. So we see that this one is selecting sentences and not selecting A, B, or C, but we're selecting. Now you'll notice that I've reached the maximum and it will tell me that I cannot select anymore. So you have all the functionality that's available. At the end of the tutorial, it'll bring up the summary box to tell me which questions I answered and which questions I did not answer. So the students will have an understanding of the full functionality of the testing window by using that online tools training. I'm going to jump back to our main website and also point out the resources available for remote proctoring. We have a full frequently asked questions document posted to the website that will go through all the different questions that our support team has been receiving. So you can go through and talk, review the questions if you have questions in advance. The locator test does not cost anything related to TABE Online usage. It would only come into effect with additional time if you're using ProctorU as a proctoring service. I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint real quick. I think I jumped ahead of our slides there. I want to discuss or point out, you also have full access to our support team. The support team can answer any questions related to creating test sessions and also remote proctoring. They are fairly well versed on all the different web conferencing systems, but we use Zoom internally within DRC, so they're especially familiar with the Zoom platform, but they understand WebEx and GoToMeeting as well when you're setting up web conferencing sessions. I'm going to pause there and see if there's any related questions that anybody has on remote proctoring or on TABE 11 and 12 specifically.
Mike, there is one question in the chat, and if anyone else has a question, just pop it in the chat and I'll read that out loud so Mike can answer it. The question is about ProctorU, and what that is does ProctorU have any try before you buy, like a service, that you could check it out,
right,
to invest in it?
So you can do a couple of things, and I'm going to go out to ProctorU. You specifically, they have some information on their website about the remote proctoring. You can have a demo, schedule a demo and go through that, the different types of proctoring. What's better, and it's not directly pointed out on their website, is that you can go to YouTube and there are ProctorU videos on YouTube to review the process. But I will tell you from the information that I have reviewed, it is very similar to remote proctoring. You're really just paying for somebody else to do it. So the difference is that the student will set up an appointment to go through ProctorU. And I want to point out the differences for those of you using TABE Online. I'm going to log in to my TABE Online portal and show you the difference in TABE Online when we're talking about remote proctoring. And this becomes active after you submit a request for use to TABE Online with ProctorU, and I'll show that as well here in a moment. Let me go into our TABE section real quick. I think it's being a little slow on me. I'm just going to close that and open up a whole new window. Try to get it to move a little bit faster. So when we're in our TABE Online system, I'm going to go down to test management, and test management is where you would create a test session for any type of TABE Online test. And when we are creating test sessions, let me wait for it to fully open here. I'm going to go ahead and select my sample account. And I'm going to go down to the bottom and create a brand new session or add a test session. When we create test sessions, we have always created a name. So I will say this is a session. I won't give it a good name. I would select TABE 11 maybe, and I can go ahead and say it's the reading test in the middle, and then go ahead and select reading level M. That might be a scenario that I'm doing. What is different between a ProctorU session is right in the middle of the screen. You'll notice the mode. It is not active right now because I have not activated it to this account. So this account is not a ProctorU option. Once you submit the paperwork to add ProctorU to your system, this mode box would become active and you would either have an online session or a proctored session. Once you select proctored, then that triggers the alertness from ProctorU to go ahead and contact the site and the student to set up an appointment. So that's the only difference when you're creating a regular test session is that online proctored mode in the test session. That was a long answer to a simple question, so hopefully we covered everything there as well.
Thank you. I think that did answer the question on ProctorU. I don't see any other questions right now.
So I'm going to also go to our main public website, again, just tabetest.com. And the TABE Test website, if I go under order forms, there's a link to an order form, and it has the ProctorU name next to it. So if I open that ProctorU, and I'll open this completely, you can send this into our customer service team. And let me open it so you can see it. And you'll notice that you do select what you might be proctoring. And I will tell you that it's more important about the bill to name up at the top of the spreadsheet than it is about what you're actually ordering, because we do the billing after the fact. So every month you would receive an invoice of the tests that were proctored through ProctorU for your program based on the tests that you registered students for. So you're not purchasing up front, but you can list which ones you want an estimate for. We listed it this way because some programs have to issue purchase orders or requisitions for specific things. And so they can do that on this form as well. But most programs, if they're receiving the invoice after the fact, will get the invoice and pay it that way. But everybody has different purchasing requirements. So some have to purchase specific quantities, and we can do that with the same order form. But typically, if you have a TABE Online account, you resubmit this on who is getting a monthly bill for the ProctorU services delivered for that month.
Mike, there is another question, and that is, can a program choose to do local proctoring or ProctorU interchangeably while local programming lasts?
Yes. Yep. You always have the option.
Okay.
And I'll go back to our test session screen. So again, in TABE Online in the portal, this is where you have always gone to create test sessions. The only difference is that I'll create one, and I'll make this say, and I'll just go ahead and add my one student, because there's a requirement to have a student in there. So real quick, I'll add this Mike Johnson right here. And now I'm going to go ahead and save this session, and it will take me back to my main test session window. And I don't have this account set up yet for ProctorU, so I didn't change the mode, but it would have the ability to change that mode. And now that I'm back to my regular testing window, if I can find that session fairly quickly. If I can scroll through this list, or I'll just type in the name, that will help me do it. And now I have my session. So whether, I named it ProctorU, but it would also have it listed so that you would know that it's a ProctorU session. But you can have multiple sessions for in-person testing, remote testing with your own web conferencing, and ProctorU test sessions all within your account. So you can do all three processes. I know some programs are doing small by appointment only in-person testing. Others are doing full remote testing, so you have that option to do that as well. I'll go back to our PowerPoint just so you have the support number. I think that's the most important number if you do have any problems during the process. Just also remember tabetest.com to find that order, the billing information for ProctorU, and that would get the process started to add ProctorU to your TABE Online system so that you'd be able to have that available. Any other questions? Okay, and again, this session was recorded, so you can certainly refer back to it. And John Weiss is, as John mentioned earlier, he's your local representative there in Ohio. So he's certainly more than happy to help out in any way with all your TABE needs for both TABE 11 and 12 and TABE Class E Online as well.
Thank you, Mike.
From that, I think I can open up the line if anybody wants to ask a question. If you can certainly do that, or if we want to add more to the chat, that's certainly good as well.
Okay, and I see John just put his information to be contacted in the chat. So he has his email in there. DRC is also an exhibitor. When you're in the virtual conference platform, you can go visit them, or also message them within the chat under exhibitors. So we'll be there. And as Mike had said, the session is going to be recorded or has been recorded.
Okay, well, thank you everybody, and I appreciate the time today, and I hope every weekend coming up, and hope you enjoy the nice weather.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, John. Are there any other questions before we end? A little early too. Okay, I'm not hearing or seeing anything, so we appreciate your presentation, DRC. Mike, good afternoon.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby.
And everyone, if you can look under this session on your agenda, there is an exit ticket. If you don't mind taking a couple minutes to fill out that exit ticket, again, on the agenda of yours in today's session at 1:15, we would appreciate it. Thank you.